I have the privilege of introducing Jay Bransford. He has over 20 years of experience as an organizational and leadership development consultant. He founded Sheepdogs International, which has been able to serve teams in many different mission organizations around the world. And presently, Jay is leading the core team of the Asia Leaders Learning Community, the ALLC. He has done to accomplish a lot to flesh out the vision, this big vision for leadership development in Asia. His heart is to strengthen teams, organizations, and individuals by helping them keep unified and in order to, and thus reaching the unreached with God's love. So it's been very clear to me that God has clearly prepared you, Jay, in personality, character, experience, and skills to work with our current long-term mission groups. And so I thank you very much for being willing to share some of your knowledge with us in this webinar. I want to pray for you, and then I'll turn it over to you. God, thank you so much for Jay and all these things that you've built into him as a person and through his experience and faithfulness down through the years. I pray for each one of us as participants in this webinar that we'd be able to tune in and catch all that you have for us and be able to give it away to those we're called to lead and influence. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, I'm turning it over to you.
All right, thank you, Bevan. Appreciate the intro, and hello to everyone. This is a little bit strange to be speaking to a bunch of people that I can't see, and it's probably difficult for you to not be able to speak as well, but we'll do the best we can. And as Bevan said, if you have questions along the way, please do type them in that chat box, and we'll try to address your questions when we can at appropriate times. Some of the questions I might be able to address during the webinar, and some of them we may wait till the very end, but we'll do the best we can. So please just throw those questions in there, and just thanks for being here. So the topic today is building effective teams, which basically assumes three things. It assumes that you believe in working in teams. It assumes that you must have an interest in either building a new team or developing a current team. And it also assumes that you're interested in that team being effective toward whatever God has called you to do as a team. So that's what this focus is going to be about today. I do want to encourage you to feel free to take some notes along the way, especially since it's hard to interact. If there's a key point you want to write down or a question you want to write down, feel free to do that on a piece of paper or even on your computer if you can somehow follow the PowerPoint and write on the computer at the same time. Please feel free to do that. I'm actually going to ask you a number of times throughout the webinar to kind of rate your current existing team or an old team on some different areas, and so you may want to jot that down along the way as well. I've got a quick poll that I want to ask, and hopefully you guys can figure out where this poll button is. I think you have a number of buttons to choose from. One of them's chat, one of them's poll, one of them's Q&A, and one of them's an offer. But if you can find the poll button, I'm just going to ask y'all a quick question just to get a sense of what kind of teams you guys are currently working in. So I believe I just sent a poll out, and there should be a question that says describe your current team, and you have 5 options there to choose from. So go ahead and just answer that as quickly as you can, and we'll see. I think you all can see the results. We'll kind of see what kind of group we've got at the moment. Good, we got 3 responses so far. Not sure how many more we'll have. 4 responses. 5. All right. Martin's not being able to see the poll. Martin, hopefully there should be some buttons on your screen. One of them says chat. One of them says poll. One of them says Q&A. And yeah, Keegan just gave some advice. Tell you what, Martin, if you can't answer the poll, you can just type in your answer in the chat. but it looks good. It looks like we've got a bit of a mixture of some smaller teams, medium-sized teams, and even some bigger teams. And surprisingly, nobody that just has themselves as a team or no team yet. So it's good to see everybody's currently on some sort of team. Let me just quick tell you, I'm going to try to switch over to sharing with you my PowerPoint. So my picture will probably go away, and hopefully you will see my PowerPoint. And I want to just quick start by explaining the four main objectives of this 2 hours here. First is to just identify what I'm calling 8 key elements of effective teams. Maybe not all of the possible key elements of effective teams, but 8 elements that I've found over the years have been very instrumental in developing teams that function well together. So that's the first objective. The second objective is to give you an opportunity to assess your own team in terms of their strengths and weaknesses in each of those 8 areas. The third objective is to give you some ideas of how to develop yourself or your team in each of those 8 areas. So you might identify what you want to develop and how. And the last thing is actually picking which one of these areas, 1 or 2 areas, that you feel like your team most wants to or needs to develop to be most effective. So those are kind of the 4 main objectives of today. First, I want to ask you a question, though. And if you would, I'd love for you to type your answers in the chat box on the screen. So I'd like you to think about either your current existing team, which may be the most likely for all of you considering your answers to the poll. Think about your current existing team. And if you want to develop, assuming you want to develop your team, you want to make it better, more effective, work better together. If that's your goal, write down a few ideas, 3 ideas, 4 ideas, 5 ideas. What would you do first? Where would be your starting point for how to develop a stronger and more effective team? If you wanted to share that with us by typing a few ideas into the chat box, that'd be great. So go ahead and do that. So again, the question is, what are the first few things you would do if you wanted to develop your team, make your team even more effective? If you wanted to share with us a couple ideas of where you might start, that'd be great. And just type that into the chat box. Thanks for that response, Keegan. That's great. Hopefully everybody can see what Keegan wrote. Anybody else want to share their ideas? So Barb's saying she's not able to see. Barb, I assume you mean the PowerPoint, is that correct?
There's also some feedback from Ivan there that you might have missed.
Oh, I might have. Let's see. Ivan, further clarify vision together. Create a greater sense of shared ownership and room for initiative. Awesome. Thank you, Ivan. And Esther just wrote, pray and worship regularly and develop common core values. And Morton wrote vision casting, open forum, prayer, identifying skills. Great, lots of good stuff here. I'm seeing Ivan's latest message too, and Krista. Great, thank you, Krista, for that as well. Hopefully you all can see the different ideas you guys came up with. Really good. It's great to get a sense of where you're currently at, what you'd already do. So Barb, the question was just thinking of a few things that you would do. Where would you start if you wanted to develop a team or increase the effectiveness of the team? So you can see, Barb, what other people answered there and think about what you might do as well. I'm going to go ahead and move forward, though, to what I'm going to suggest is some things to do, and you guys hit on a lot of them already. But I first want to start by talking about the definition of just what I think of when I think of a team, and this will be pretty quick. But just to have a common understanding of a team or teamwork, we're talking about people, not just one person, right? It's a team. It's hopefully a diverse group of people with different skills, different experiences that are unified together. This is a multi-part definition. A team, obviously, we hope works effectively together towards some common purpose. So we have to have a common purpose that we all agree on. Teams often work under changing conditions and difficult conditions. And I like to stress that with people so that if you find in your team life, in your ministry or your school, if you find that things are changing all the time, it's frustrating. If you find that there's challenges and difficulties going on all the time, try not to get too down about it, because actually that is normal, common, and actually to be expected on any team. If you're actually doing something, you're going to come upon problems and difficulties and things changing, and that's just part of life. It's part of working on a team. It's normal. So don't get discouraged and think, oh, maybe we should quit. That's normal. What's important is how we respond to those difficult situations. So it is normal to be under change and in difficult conditions. Now, how does a team work together? One thing they don't do is they don't place blame on one another when things go wrong, when people mess up. Effective teams do not point the finger at one another. That's important to remember. But they do involve other people in decision making. So it's not one person making all decisions. It's hopefully getting the members of the team involved, maybe outside people as well, getting input and involving people in decision making. And lastly, in this definition of teamwork that I like to use, teams are very careful about how they use their power. Every individual on the team, that is, not just the so-called leader, but everybody on the team has different influence and different power. And if we can use that influence and power in a constructive way, then teams can be very effective. So that's just a general definition of team I like to look at. But I'm going to move forward to the actual visual that I want to walk through today. And some of you may have seen the ALLC newsletter, I believe it was 2 months ago. It had an article in it that I wrote that actually had the same visual, and it was an article about the same topic, how to develop an effective team. So if you saw that article, you already saw this visual. And what I want to do today is just go into a little bit more detail about this visual and these 8 key elements. And I probably should say from the beginning here that each of these key elements of an effective team can actually be its own teaching subject and could take anywhere from 2 hours to 2 days just to teach on one of these subjects. So today I'm just going to hit them all at a fairly high level, just a little bit deeper though than that short article you might have seen. But you can see this wheel hopefully in front of you. I tend to start on this wheel when I want to read it. I tend to start at like around 10 o'clock. If you think of this as a clock, and a picture where 10 o'clock on the clock would be, where it says, who are we? That's generally where I start when I try to read through this thing, although there isn't really one particular start and end point on this chart. But there's 8 questions that are asked here. Who are we? And then at about 11 o'clock, where are we now? And then where are we going? And then at about 2 o'clock, how will we get there? And then what is expected of us? And then around 5 o'clock, it says, what support do we need to be successful? How effective are we? And then the last one, number 8, says, what recognition do we get? So these are the 8 areas that I want to go into a little bit more detail on And I'm going to come back to this visual throughout this webinar. And actually, for anyone interested in seeing this PowerPoint or having a copy of it, you can just let me know, and I'd be happy to share this PowerPoint with you after the webinar. So basically, these 8 keys to developing effective teams, I like to just state them as 8 very, very simple questions that you can read through and you can talk to your team about and say, hey, how would we answer this? How would we answer, who are we? And that's really talking about, do we know one another on this team? How well do we know one another? How well do we understand our giftings, our interests, our strengths, our passions, our experience? How well do we know one another? And if you talk about that question with your team, you can say, hey, do we feel like we know each other well? Are we comfortable with the level at which we know one another? And that's really the bottom line, is asking, who are we? When you ask the question, can you answer it, and are you comfortable with your answer? All right, so who are we? I don't really know. I'm not really sure. No, I don't really know. Or yes, I'm very clear on that, and I'm comfortable that we know each other well enough. Now, that first one, of course, who are we, is something that we can all always get better at. We can always learn more about one another and about ourselves. But what I like to do is have people go through these 8 questions and just simply talk with your team and say, hey, are we in agreement that we're comfortable that we can answer this question well? In terms of who are we, in terms of where are we now, what's the situation going on around us, the environment we're in, the needs around us, do we really understand it well? The third question, are we comfortable with knowing where we're going, where we're heading, what our purpose is, what our vision is? Are we comfortable with that? The fourth question, are we comfortable with knowing exactly how we're going to achieve that vision or that purpose? Are we comfortable with the plan we have in place? And then the fifth question, what is expected of us? Again, are we comfortable that each of us really clearly understands what each of us is supposed to do to accomplish our purpose? The sixth question, what support do we need? Okay, well, do we need a lot of support? What kind of support do we need? Are we getting that support? Are we comfortable with that? That's that question. Seventh question, how effective are we? That's a little bit more subjective, but you can come up with different ways to measure yourself. Are we happy with how effective our team is functioning, with the results we're getting, with how well we work together, how well we get along? Are we happy with that? And the last question, what recognition do we get? So do we get recognition? Do we celebrate? And are we happy or comfortable with the amount that we're doing with that? So this is the simple, high level 8 key areas that I like to look at for developing effective teams. And it can be as simple as truly just sitting down and asking, discussing this with your team and getting a quick answer of yes, no, not sure on every one of these, which can quickly help you target in on where you might want to focus to help develop your team. There may be one area where you say, no, we are definitely not comfortable with this. Or there might be a couple areas. Or there might be an area too where you say, I'm not really sure. We're not sure where we're going. We're not sure how we're going to get there. We're not sure what's expected of us. We have some idea, but we're not totally clear. So you can walk through these questions at a very high level and get a sense of where to start. Where do I need to start to really either develop a new team or to just increase the effectiveness of my current team? So we could actually stop the webinar right here and say, okay, this is all you need to know. But what I want to do actually is go a little bit further into detail into each one of these to give you an idea of what does each one of these mean, and if I needed to develop or work on one of these areas, how might I do that? And that's where I can go into a little bit of detail, but not a lot because it's too many topics to cover, but I'll try to hit a little bit. And what I would encourage you is that as we finish this webinar, if there are particular areas that you personally would like more help with or would like more tools or advice on, you can always contact me or the ALLC and with specific questions, and we'd be happy to try to help you with those situations. So I'm going to go to the next slide, which focuses in on generally where I typically start on this wheel, although again, I already said that there is no one particular starting point. And so this is the who are we aspect of developing effective teams. Understanding your team, who do you have on the team, and how were they wired, how did God create them? Now this is to me, it's an obvious starting point because it's great to know who you're working with so that you can work well together. But in reality, oftentimes people will be called to a place and God gave them a vision. And that's their starting point, is clarifying that vision. right? Which is the third point on this wheel. Or some people will just say, I'm just here. I don't even know what the vision is. God just called me to come here. And that's really the second part of this wheel. So there is not necessarily one particular starting point, but I'm going to start here with who are we? And what I did on this slide is I just listed some examples of ways to get to know people and how they're wired. This is not at all meant to be comprehensive. There's much more to us than just these areas. So please keep that in mind. This is just some examples of ways we can get to know each other. So we've got things like the DISC or the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs. Those, for those of you familiar with those, just two different types of personality assessments. There's actually tons of personality assessments out there, but those are two common ones. If you're familiar with them, it's a great way to get to know the personalities of your staff members and how they like to interact, how they like to relate to one another, and it helps you to figure out how to work well together. Love languages, you're probably familiar with that. How do people like to be valued and appreciated? Giftings, what are some of their spiritual giftings of each of your staff members? Strengths and weaknesses. There's a particular book and assessment called Strengths Finder that I like using that helps really identify some great strengths of people, but you don't have to use that book or that assessment. You can just simply ask people about their strengths, their weaknesses, their challenges. You can find out about people's education and experience. Again, the goal here is to get to know your team. The better we know each other, the easier it is to work together, to understand one another, to have patience and grace with one another, because we're all different. The next thing on this list is that I wrote is risk tolerance. That's an interesting one, but it's actually good to keep in mind and realize that everybody on your team is likely to have a different tolerance for risk, meaning how much risk do they like to take? Do they like to take a lot of risk or a little risk? And what kind of things are they comfortable taking risk on? Are they comfortable taking financial risk? Are they comfortable going out and speaking to large groups? Do they love taking on new challenging projects, or are they afraid of that? And there's not a right or wrong level of risk tolerance, but it's helpful to know because we don't want to push people past what they're comfortable with. We might want to push them to their edge, but we don't want to push them too far. And we want to be, we want to be careful and thoughtful and empathetic to people and where they are. And not everybody has to love risk as much as you. And not everybody has to be as scared of things as you, whatever it is, right? So risk tolerance is actually interesting to get to know about your team. Career anchors is referring to, again, this is a particular assessment and book written by a guy named Edgar Schein, but career anchors is meant to just really talk about what are the things that are the greatest motivators to you in terms of the work you do. What's most important to you? At the end of the day, what's the most important thing about what you do? And what drives you the most? And there are actually quite a few different things that could be people's drivers. And it's good to know because you need to make sure that each person on your team is being fulfilled in what most motivates them. So again, that's one of those areas here that I don't have time to go into, but that's just an example of, you could even ask people their answers on that. Passions and personal goals. What are people passionate about? What do they personally want to accomplish? Very important to know on a team. Also just people's individual work values. What's valuable to them? How do they like to operate? Hopefully you have a lot in common, but you may have some things that are a little bit different. It's good to talk through those things. But at the end of the day, the reason that we want to get to know one another on the team is because it's really these bottom three boxes. The more we get to know each other, the more we know how to relate to one another on the team. The more we know what we should and should not do with each other on a team. What should we avoid doing with this person? What should we do? And at the bottom there, it says, what types of roles might this person be best for on this team? The more you know about them, the more you can clearly identify a really good role for them that fits on your team. It's a need you have on the team, and they fit it well. And I tried filling in this diagram with some examples. So again, if you get a copy of this PowerPoint later, you can see some examples of what I might be talking about. But this is a lot of times when people say, "Oh, I want to do a team building workshop." This is oftentimes what people want. They just want to spend some time getting to know one another. And maybe they do it through some fun activities, or maybe they actually specifically try to talk through this stuff. And that's great. So it's one thing you can do during a team building time. Maybe you have a team building time with your team once a year where you set aside time specifically to build team. and get to know one another and have some fun, well, some of these areas might be things that you decide you want to talk about. Or I've seen some teams say, you know what, let's focus on a different staff member each week or each month and give them some time during a staff meeting where they can tell their story. They can tell us about themselves in some of these areas. Sometimes it may just be giving people an hour to tell their life story or their testimony or things like that. There's so much to get to know about people, and as your staff come and go, you need to continuously be sharing these things with one another, because your team members leave and new people come, and they don't necessarily know this about one another. But it's extremely extremely important that we understand each other on the team so that we can work well together. So what I'd like you to do, I'm going to switch back to my screen here. If you all have any questions as I'm going again, please just feel free to type it in the chat box. All right. So I just noticed that Esther wrote a question a little bit ago that the PowerPoint is fuzzy. I'm hoping that it's clearing up for you. It may have to do with the internet speed connection. And it may be that it takes a few seconds to become clear. But if you guys have questions on any of these as I go along, please let me know. What I would like you to do is think about your team right now and think about how well you know each of your team members, maybe in some of the areas that I listed on this slide, and think about how well your team members know and understand one another, with the goal of understanding how to work well together and understanding what roles are best for one another. Good, Esther just said it's better. Thanks, Esther. So can you right now give it some thought and say, how would I answer this question of these 8 keys for effective teams? How well do I feel like my team is doing on this first key of who are we? Understanding who we are and everything that we bring to the table, understanding how God wired each one of us and utilizing that well in our roles on the team. How would you rate yourself? So maybe rate yourself on this on a scale from 1 to 10, where 10 is absolutely perfect and 1 is quite poor. Where would you rate your team right now on understanding who are we? Go ahead and think about that. If you want to share it on the chat, feel free, but you don't have to. I'm going to give you a minute. And yeah, if you want to answer that, go ahead and do it in the chat box. I think that'll be easier. Anybody willing to share where you see your team on that one? My wife is sitting next to me, and she just said, maybe a 6 for my team. So there you go. There's one answer. Anybody else? Okay, I don't want to embarrass anybody, so that's okay if you don't want to answer that. But maybe some of these later ones you guys can share where you think you are. I'm going to move on to the second part, the second key, which is, move back to my PowerPoint, which is, we just talked about who are we. So the second part is where are we now? And that really talks about the situation that you find yourself in. So yes, literally what city, state, nation, country, whatever, what neighborhood you're in, but also the situation around you. So when we think about where are we now, we think, okay, well, God sent me somewhere. What do I know about where I am? What do I know about the country? What do I know about the people group? What do I know about the audience that God is wanting me to focus on? What do I know about their needs? What do I know about the opportunities here? What do we know about the problems? What do we know that we can think about? Because until you understand the current situation that you're in, it's hard to develop a vision and a goal that is relevant to the situation that you're in. You first have to know what's going on around me. What are the needs around me? And then how can we best fulfill those needs? What part is God wanting us to play in fulfilling the needs of the situation around me? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over quickly 2 different approaches that I commonly use to get a sense of where are we now. Now, these are only 2 approaches. There's lots more, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on these because it takes too much time. But this first one, as you see on the slide, says situation appraisal. And basically all it means is a process that you go through to list out any concerns that you know of in the environment around you. Now, you can pick a more specific theme when you think about this. You can say, oh, what's our concern about our target audience, about our students that are coming, about our team, about our ministry, about this city, about this nation, about this people group. Whatever the theme is, whatever the focus needs to be, but what are the concerns that we have on our mind? And you just brainstorm with your team. What are all the concerns we have? What are all the things that we know about? There may be problems, there may be opportunities, there may be decisions that need to be made, there may be actions that need to get taken. What are all the concerns that we know of? List them all out, and then prioritize them. What's the most important thing that we would want to focus on as our team first? Plan some next steps. If we know what our priority is, what's the next step we would need to take to work on that, and who would need to be involved. And that's it. It's a very simple process, but actually this is something I like using on a weekly basis. You can use it in any context in life. You can use it with your family, with your ministry, with just about anything. But hey, what's going on around us right now? What are we concerned about? And what do we need to prioritize? What do we need to do? And who's going to get involved to do it? Very simple process called situation appraisal. So that's one way to get an idea of the situation you're in now. And by the way, you might notice at the bottom, I gave credit to a company called Kepner Trigo for this, which you can Google if you like. It's a great company, great consulting company. And here's an example on this slide of what a situation appraisal might look like. Basically, you list some different questions to ask yourselves on the left. What problems are occurring? What decisions need to be made? What plans do we need to implement? What changes are we anticipating? What opportunities exist? Or what bothers us about the current situation? And you just list those concerns. And maybe you look at the current impact, the future impact, the urgency of that particular concern. And as you look at those impacts and urgency, you kind of determine an overall priority of what do we really need to focus on first. And then what are our next steps and who would need to get involved. So I threw in some examples here on this slide that'll give you a better idea of what I'm talking about. But again, I'm not going to go into detail on this because it takes too long. But the most important concept here is just to take some time to talk with your staff, talk with your team, and identify what the concerns are out there and prioritize them and figure out who's going to do what. That's it. That's the bottom line. You don't have to have a fancy process like I'm showing you here, but that's the bottom line. The second way that I like to do a situational, or to figure out where we are now, it has a name that's almost the exact same thing, so it's a little confusing, but I call it a situational analysis. But this is maybe just a fancy way of saying, hey, do a SWOT analysis. If you're familiar with a SWOT analysis, it just means looking at strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats. That's what SWOT stands for. Looking at those things, things that are internal to your team and things that are external to your team that might impact and influence the focus and the strategy of your work. It's good to do a SWOT analysis, maybe on a yearly basis, whenever necessary, with your team, to make sure that you're up to date with the current situation within your team and around your team. So I've worked with a number of quite a few different ministries here in Thailand over the years, and some of them have been extremely good about doing this, and I've worked with some of them to do these SWOT analysis. For example, people working in the field of anti-trafficking. There's a group here who brings a big group of people together every couple years, and they bring people in from the government of Thailand. They bring people in from education, the field of education in Thailand. They bring in people who are working in anti-trafficking, maybe police. They bring people in that are doing rescuing and people who are helping those in need and those who are at risk. They bring all these people in together, and they do a SWOT analysis together. every 2 or 3 years. And they talk about, okay, what are the strengths in what we're doing? All of us together. What are some of the weaknesses? What are some of the opportunities? What are some of the threats that we see we're facing in the area of anti-trafficking? You can do this for any ministry, any focus, a school, a ministry, anything. And it's good to do occasionally. This slide gives you some examples of things you could analyze or do a SWOT analysis on. You might do a SWOT analysis on the location you're at, the city, the country in which you work. In terms of past, present, and future, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats within your city or country. You might do a SWOT analysis on the needs of the local people. Maybe physical needs, emotional needs, relational needs, intellectual needs, financial needs, spiritual needs, but whoever your target group of people is. It might be a people group, it might be something different, but do a SWOT analysis on your actual target group, right? You might need to do a SWOT analysis on your economic or political situation. That happens here in Thailand, where I am, frequently. We have a bit of political upheaval now and then. It's good to take a check on that and say, how does that affect me and what I'm doing and what I need to be doing? You might do a SWOT analysis on the social and cultural norms, on the status of technology and how that affects you, or the direction that technology is going and how that might affect the future of your ministry. You might do a SWOT analysis on other organizations or churches that are working in your same area. And that's kind of like what I was talking about earlier, a little consortium where you get people together and say, hey, we're all doing something similar. Let's do a SWOT analysis and see how we can help one another. And you might just do a simple SWOT analysis on your team, on your staff. That's the last one on the list. As a team, what are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? This is a great way, again, to get an idea of where are we now. What's the situation we currently find ourselves in? If we don't know where we are now, it's hard to know what direction to start walking, right? You need to know where you are now. So I'm going to switch back here so that I can see if you guys have asked any questions. If you have any questions about this particular focus area for developing effective teams, again, feel free to type it in the chat field. And while you're doing that, I do want you to, again, think on this area and think about your team. Think about your situation that you're in as a team, as a ministry, as a school, and ask yourselves, so how comfortable are we right now with understanding clearly where we are, the situation that we're in, situation around us, situation of our focus group, of our people group, of our nation, whatever it is. How comfortable are we with understanding where we are now? On a scale from 1 to 10, 10 is great. Where would you rate yourself? And here, I want you to write this down because at the end of this webinar, I want you to look at all these areas and pick what's the area that we most need to look at. So go ahead and think about that. Rate your team on where are we now. Again, if you want to share it with us, I'd love for everybody to see where you all feel you are. I appreciate Ivan writing here on the first question, saying that in his team, they seem to know each other quite well as team leaders, but maybe the individual team members may not know each other as well. That's great insight to have. Very good. So please go ahead and answer the second one and rate your team on the second area. Where are we now? Where do you see your own team on this area? Oh, and I noticed Keegan's answer on the first one too. Thank you, Keegan. Any more answers on the second one? Where are we now? How well do we understand the situation that our ministry or school is in? My wife just said an 8 for her team. Good job. Barb just said a 4 or a 5. Okay. Thanks, Barb. Esther around a 7. Excellent. And again, you may notice there may be differences if you talk to different members of the team. So these questions are actually even more powerful when you can ask them as a team together, whether it's with your leadership team or with your entire team. Because sometimes you'll find that people don't agree. And when they don't agree, that's important to know. Anyone else want to share? Okay, Ivan, thanks. Not sure you're returning. Yeah, okay, Keegan, thank you for that answer as well. And I know Keegan's running a school, so some of that is going to change quickly. Schools change quickly, your staff change, and obviously your students change. So this is one of those areas that within the team you have to keep an eye on, but also externally too. All right, I'm going to move on. You guys can keep answering that if you want, but I'm going to move on. And this next slide actually just shows the significance of finding out where you are now, whether it's a SWOT analysis or that situation appraisal I talked about. The reason that helps is because it helps you to figure out what the problems are, what the opportunities are out there, so that you can maybe modify or sometimes even create your vision. If you understand the situation out there, it helps you to modify not only your vision of what you're trying to achieve, but also your strategy. You see different things that need to happen that are important depending on the situation you're in. So it might affect your strategy, it might affect your plan, and of course, if you've got a strategy and a plan defined, it helps you to figure out your budget. So it's a great starting point, doing a situation appraisal or a situation analysis to figure out where you are in order to put the rest of your plans together as a ministry, as a team. Now, none of this, of course, supersedes whatever God is speaking to you. God may give you a clear vision, a clear strategy, a clear plan. That's all great. But this is kind of, in my opinion, ways we can work with God. Sometimes God gives us the whole answer, the whole picture, all the details, and oftentimes he gives us parts of it, and we have to figure out some of the rest. And some of what I'm showing you today are ways that we can figure out some of the rest of it on our own. But we're doing it and we're partnering with God along the way. So we've talked about who are we, where are we now. The next thing is, where are we going? Oops. So where are we going? This is really just talking about, are you clear on what your overall purpose is, your overall mission, your vision, your purpose? Are you clear? Where is your true north? Where are you heading? What are you ultimately trying to accomplish? That's what this question's about. Maybe we know ourselves and our team. Maybe we understand the situation we're in. Do we know what we're here for? Do we know exactly what we're trying to achieve? And hopefully here's where God's needs to speak clearly to you. But just because God speaks something clearly to you, doesn't mean you're quite done. You need to be able to communicate that clearly to your team, right? So sometimes it just takes some time to articulate and think about, what is it that God spoke to me, and how can I clearly communicate that to my team, to my supporters, to the people that we collaborate with, whatever. And oftentimes people do that in the form of coming up with a vision statement or a mission statement or a purpose statement, and that's all great. So you need to decide for yourself, what would be most helpful for me and my team, and my ministry or my school. What would be most helpful for us to communicate what we're all about, what we're trying to achieve? What is the future that we want to see? Why do we exist? You absolutely have to define that, right? And take whatever God gives you and come up with a great way to communicate it. I also like to add to it this thing called BHAG goals, BHAG goals, which stands for big, hairy, audacious goals. It's great to set some big goals for yourself, for your team. What are we here to achieve? What are the big outcomes that we're trying to achieve? They may be difficult, they may be challenging, but they hopefully are also inspiring us to something good, something better. It's great to identify some great big outcomes that you want to see your ministry or your school shooting for. So that's, again, there's lots of different ways to develop a mission or a vision or a purpose or goals. And so I'm not going to go into those details, but if you're in a situation where you feel like you need some help defining vision or mission or purpose or goals, again, the ALLC website has some great tools and information and resources on that. Plus, you can always send us questions through the website or through Facebook, and we're happy to try to point you in the right direction or connect you with the right people or give you some resources. So I'm gonna not go into more detail than that, but again, I want you to think about your team. Think about your team and think about, where are you going as a team, as a school? What's your purpose? What's your vision, mission, purpose, goals? How comfortable are you that you're all on the same page with that, and that it's clear, that you can answer that question clearly. Take a minute here and rate your team again on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the best. How comfortable are you with where your ministry, your school is going, how clear that is, and how well everyone on the team is in agreement? And then please share it in the chat again so we can see what you guys are thinking. This is not meant to embarrass anybody, by the way, just meant to share. Okay, thanks, Keegan and Barb. So it looks like an area that Keegan's feeling pretty comfortable with on the ministry and even the school. Yep, Barb, depends on which team you're talking about. That's a good point. Some of you may work on multiple teams. So for this process for today, it probably does help to think about one specific team that you want to consider all these things for. But if you want to do all your teams at the same time, just feel free, go for it. Yeah, many of us work on multiple teams. Who else is willing to share here? Where would you rate your team in terms of understanding where you're going? My wife says a 7. Thank you so much. Esther, thank you. Okay. By the way, part of the reason that I like you guys sharing your answers is, again, not to embarrass you, but actually to help everybody see and realize that every team has areas where they need to improve, want to improve. Every team does. There's no such thing as a team that's doing perfectly in all these areas. And from month to month, year to year, your answers on these are going to change. And that's okay. That's part of that definition I gave earlier of a team, is that things change, challenges happen, right? And that's normal. So what's important is that you continue to go through these questions, consider these questions over time, and see what's changed and what do we need to focus on now, right? Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Esther. So I'm going to move on to the next focus area. We've talked about who are we, where are we now, where are we going? And the next focus area is how will we get there, okay? And here, we're simply talking about, do you know how to turn your vision and goals into a plan? And have you turned your vision and goals into a plan? Now, I don't want to overcomplicate this, but basically, so to keep it simple, whatever your vision is, hopefully you have some goals that relate to that vision. And whatever your goals are, hopefully you have some strategies in mind to achieve those goals. And whatever strategies you've identified, hopefully you have some tasks or initiatives that need to happen to fulfill that strategy, right? That's all we're talking about. That's a plan. But it all lines up and leads to the final outcome and visions and goals that you have for your ministry or your school. It needs to be in alignment, and there needs to be logic there that says, here's what we do, here's why we do it, and here's the outcome that we try to achieve. Now, on this screen here, I've put a graphic that probably looks really confusing. It's got circles and squares and hexagons on it. Again, I'm not going to go through how this particular thing works. It's called a results chain, but it's a way of visually depicting, if you start on the very right, the final outcomes that your ministry or your school is all about, that you want to see achieved. Those final outcomes, they're kind of blue circles in this case. If those are the things you want to achieve, then what capabilities do you need to have to be able to achieve those outcomes? And those are those green circles. They might be strategic capabilities, they might be intermediate outcomes. But But then in order to have that capability, what kind of projects and activities do you need to do to get that capability or that outcome? And those are the light blue boxes. So they might be tasks, they might be projects, initiatives. What's the work that needs to get done to achieve the intermediate and final outcomes? And then I also threw these red hexagons in, which are supposed to represent risks. Well, we'd like to accomplish this, but there's this risk here that's maybe outside of our control. And sometimes it's good to highlight those things. And sometimes there's something you can do about those risks. But at the end of the day, what's most important is not necessarily what graphic you use to represent it, but what's important is that you have clearly thought through your plan of how are you going to achieve these outcomes and this final vision that you have. Do we have a clear plan in place? Do we have a clear strategy in place to achieve what we want to achieve? And I want to throw out 2 words to you guys that you can write down that I find very helpful when trying to strategize and plan. And the 2 words are necessary and sufficient. So when you're thinking about an outcome you want to see achieved, a goal you want to see achieved, when you're thinking about that, what all do we need to do to achieve this goal, to achieve this outcome? I want you to ask yourself those 2 questions, use those 2 words. Have we thought, is everything that we're doing necessary? Is it all necessary to achieve that outcome? And have we thought of everything that's sufficient to really, truly achieve that goal or outcome? Is everything we're doing necessary? And is it actually all sufficient? Is it enough? Is there something we're missing? Should we really be able to expect that we can achieve that outcome if we haven't done X, Y, or Z? So it's a good sanity check on your plan to go back and ask yourself the necessary and sufficient question. Think about your goals, think about your outcomes. Is everything necessary? And have we thought of everything that's sufficient to truly achieve that outcome? And it's good to go back and ask yourself about your plan. Go review your plan and your strategy occasionally, once a year, whatever it is, and ask yourself that question. And see what new things you may have identified that also need to happen, okay? So that is how will we get there. I'm gonna switch back so I can see whether you guys have questions or not. Again, if you have questions, let me know. But in the meantime, think about your team. Think about your plan for your team. How well do you and your team understand how you're going to achieve your purpose, your vision, your objectives? How comfortable are you with the plan you have on a scale from 1 to 10? How comfortable am I with how we're going to get there, what our plan is, our strategy? And so go ahead and think about that. And again, please share your answer with us all on the chat. Okay, thank you, Barb. Very funny, Keegan. All right, Keegan, the question was, rate your own team on how comfortable you are with understanding how you're going to achieve your end goals, your outcome, your vision. On a scale from 1 to 10, how comfortable are you with your plan that you have in place to achieve your goals? Okay, thanks, Keegan. Ivan, thank you, maybe a 4, all right. Esther, 7 or 8 personally, okay. And Keegan, yeah, depends on which goals specifically. So maybe some goals you have a more clear plan on, and some goals it's more vague. That's common, yep, that makes sense. Especially the newer goals that come up, sometimes we haven't quite figured out how we're gonna do that yet. Okay. Thank you all for that. Again, this is just for your benefit, so that when we get to the end of this call, you'll be able to compare and contrast how you feel like your team's doing in these different areas, and hopefully which area you personally like to focus on more to help develop your team. Let's see. Going back to our wheel here. We talked about who are we, where are we now, where are we going, how will we get there. The next key is talking about what is expected of us. So now that we know what our vision is, if we know what our plan is, then it's possible to know what each person is actually supposed to do, right? Hard to know what people are supposed to do if we don't have a plan in place of what's supposed to get done, right? So what is expected of us? This question, this key to developing an effective team. It basically just means identifying work, defining what kind of work or activities need to happen, what kind of tasks, structuring them in some way that makes logical sense. Some pieces of work and responsibilities can be grouped together. And then finally, it means assigning those work activities to different people so that people know who's supposed to do what. So it's kind of logical, right? But oftentimes it's something that doesn't get clearly communicated. And it starts with identifying and defining key work tasks and processes. Sometimes you have to define some policies for some ministries or bases or schools. But what do we need to identify and define as things that need to get done? Tasks that need to happen, work that needs to happen. In some cases, you need to define how we do it as well, and that's where the process comes into place. What process do we use in our ministry or our school to do such and such? And that's where it starts, identifying all that work. But you don't know what work needs to get done unless you have a plan in place, right? So that's why it makes sense to go around this wheel diagram, kind of in the order that I'm working you through it. You have a vision, you have some big high-level goals, and then you have a plan in place of how you're going to achieve that, a strategy. And then you identify, well, what kind of work does that mean we have to do? And who's going to do it? So the first bullet says identifying and defining those key work processes and policies. The second bullet says identifying specific work tasks and then grouping those tasks into logical roles. So if you have a bunch of tasks that all relate to one kind of skill, it might make sense to group those into one particular role, right? And that's where you then can come up with role descriptions and say, okay, you're going to be hospitality person, right? And you're going to be the person who helps with scheduling, and you're going to be the person who helps with whatever. We have different roles on our team. But roles, hopefully, are in alignment with the giftings and skills and interests of each person. So again, this is where this relates all the way back to our first step of knowing who we are. If we know who we are, we know the skills and giftings and interests and passions of everybody on the team. It makes this easier then to identify work tasks, group the work tasks, and assign roles or define roles for people. Because we really need to, the third bullet, align our roles and our people in a way that people are going to be fulfilled and best utilized. And then the fourth bullet here is just making sure that everybody has a clear job description. Now, you may or may not need to have some fancy job description template that you use. I would, however, recommend that you write things down. Write down your plan. Write down the main work that needs to get done. Write down who is in what role and what that generally means and what they're supposed to do in that role. One of the biggest areas of conflict I see in teams is when people don't understand their role and what they're supposed to be doing. And there's not good communication, there's not good feedback, things aren't documented, aren't written down, and people get frustrated. So this takes some time. It might be a little bit, it may be outside of your gift set, it might be outside of your interest, it might be too boring for you, but it is a key to developing an effective team. So if it's something that you're not good at, that you don't like doing, find somebody on your team who can help with it, who is better at organizing these things, structuring things, defining these things, whatever, and work with them on it. But knowing what's expected of us is absolutely critical if we think we're going to achieve anything. That's probably common sense. On this slide here, you'll see a couple of examples. I have an example of a process on the bottom left, and I have just a template of a job description on the right. The process may or may not make sense to you as the way I formatted it, but you can do it any way you want as long as you figure out the tasks, define your processes, and come up with some role descriptions for people. So I'm going to leave that there. And again, I want you to think about your team. And here, before you rate your team, I'll give you a few questions to think about and consider. For example, for your team, what processes or policies do you think might be helpful for your team to define? Are there any processes or policies that would be helpful for your team to define that might help you guys work more effectively together? If so, you might want to jot that down. Second question you can consider: how do you usually translate your project, your goals and your project plans? How do you translate that into clear expectations, work expectations for your team, for your staff? So if you've got a plan, how do you normally take that plan and make sure people have clear roles and responsibilities? What process do you normally use to do that? And along with that, think about, how do you normally go about assigning work to your staff? What kind of thought process do you use when you think about who should do what? And how well do you connect the tasks you have to do with what you know about each other, with what you know about your staff and their strengths and their giftings and their interests? Sometimes we purposely want to stretch our staff to do new things, different things. There's always going to be tasks that need to be done that nobody wants to do, and that's okay. But in general, we hopefully try to align well the work that we need to get done and the people that we've got. So how well do you do that? So as you think about this particular area, what's expected of us, of our team, you might want to think about your team and rating your team again on a scale from 1 to 10. And this time, think about it from everybody's perspective on the team. What if you have 5, 6, 8 people on your team? What would they say? How would they answer this question? How comfortable are we with knowing what's expected of us? And go ahead and share that with us. Looks like Keegan just wrote something. Okay, so Keegan's using something called a matrix team organizational tool. So they're working in a matrix structure, which means that people might have multiple bosses, kind of, that means. That they report to different people for different things. They're part of multiple teams. And that's been very helpful for Keegan. That's great. Okay. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Keegan. If everybody else sees what Keegan wrote there. I think what Keegan brings up is really helpful because it reminds us that not only do we need to have job descriptions, but we need to continuously be communicating about who's doing what, when, and how, and what challenges people are coming across on a daily basis or a weekly basis. Hey, okay, well, I'm supposed to be doing this, but this has come up, and I've got this problem, and I've got, this challenge, and you need to know about that so that you can adjust and so you can help one another. So, like Keegan's saying, having their weekly team meetings to discuss what people have done, what they're going to be doing in the week ahead, what their issues and challenges are. That's awesome to hear, Keegan. Anybody else want to share how they'd rate their team on this one? Keegan, I'm guessing that Slack is a technology tool you guys are using. Oh, Evan knows it. Okay. Okay, I'm reading Ivan's comment right now. That's good. That's a great perspective to see. Yeah, I think Ivan brings up the point that when we're talking about what's expected of us, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of communication, and there is a certain amount that can be written down, and then there's a lot that is fluid on a day-to-day basis, which is why we have to continuously talk about it, right? And so that's a great point, Ivan. Thank you. Barb, thanks for that rating. Anyone else? Yeah, Ivan, I'm going back to your comment there, just reading it again. I think it's so true that in order for people to be comfortable with what they're doing, it can take a long time to work with people, especially, I think, when people are maybe newer to a ministry, or when they are maybe haven't had quite as much experience to know what they like, what they're good at, what they want to do. It can take a tremendous amount of time as a leader to work with those staff, to help them to, in a way, we're helping them to understand themselves. We're giving them some experiences to try in the ministry and see what works, what they like, how they respond, and then we have to work with them on that and say, okay, what'd you learn from that? What'd you like? What did you not like? What adjustments do we need to make? What do you need to learn? Whatever. So I love that this is not like this is not a formula that I'm working you all through, that you just have a nice quick sit down meeting and it's all figured out. All right, it all takes time. And actually, as I think about this wheel that I'm presenting to you today, I may have said this already, but I really like to think of it as concepts that we keep juggling in our mind as leaders all the time, that we constantly keep asking ourselves these things. It's not just a one-time thing. It's not a once-a-year thing. But at any point in time, it's great to keep all these things in mind and say, hey, how are we doing on that? How are we doing on that? How are we doing on that area? Yeah, thanks, Keegan. Sounds like you agree you've had some of the same challenges. It's always a challenge with bringing in new people. Yep. So again, it's part of that definition of team. Things change all the time, and it's so helpful, so helpful if we can change our mindset about these kinds of things. That, hey, you know what? It's normal. It's actually good. It's expected. Things are going to always change. People are going to come and go. Situations are going to change. Difficulties are going to come up, and that's part of life. And that's just the next thing to get to deal with, to get to respond to and figure out. Think of it as a challenge, as an opportunity, instead of getting frustrated. Because I think when we come across all these challenges and changes in our ministries over time, it can easily get really frustrating over time. They keep adding up and adding up. But we need instead to think about all these things as facts of life, and this is the way things happen, and it's just a new challenge to face, and we'll overcome this just like we overcame other things, right? That's a great point. All right, I'm going to move on to the next part of the model. Who are we? Where are we now? Where are we going? How will we get there? What's expected of us? And then the next thing, what support do we need? So another key in effective teams is knowing what kind of support you need. What help, what support does your team need to be successful? Now, ultimately, God. When we start forgetting about God and putting him first and going to him and asking him for his input and his help, that's when things start going downhill. So we always need to go there first. What support do we need? Oh my gosh, we need to lean into God. We need to lean into God. But we are also part of the family of God, which means that there are other things around us, people, resources, technology, books, whatever. There are things around us that also can help us and support us. So the kinds of support we need as a team, it's really helpful to think about this periodically and say, what kind of help do we currently need? Things are changing. What kind of help do we need now? What kind of prayer do we need help with now? You guys probably all send newsletters and hopefully prayer requests out to people periodically, and the prayer requests change, right? What kind of prayer support do we need right now, locally and abroad? What kind of resources do we need right now or in the year ahead? What kind of books, what kind of technology, what kind of equipment, what kind of money resources, and what kind of people resources? What do we need to support this team to do what we're called to do? What kind of training and development do we need for our staff, for our team? What are things that we need to learn and get better at? What kind of coaching do we need? What kind of mentoring do we need? Are there certain people who would really like or need a coach? Are there some people who would really like or need a mentor? What about in the area of pastoral care? What kind of support can those kind of people provide? Can we provide some within our team? Is there a need for some pastoral care that people can go to outside of our team? And how can we help provide that kind of care that our team needs? And again, that's going to change over time. Debriefing is a type of pastoral care or member care. How often do we need to debrief? When do we need to debrief? After what kind of events and things? And are we doing that enough? Are we doing it as a team? Do we debrief as individuals, as families, as couples? What kind of support do we need in terms of debriefing? And the last one, orientation. And that's a big one, like Keegan was saying earlier. Some of you have staff that come and go frequently. Orientation is so helpful to get people off to a good start, to understand the context of what you do, how you do it, to understand one another, to get to know one another. So key to have a good orientation program when people come and go. These are just some examples of support that you probably could come up with other ideas of support as well. But it's important to continuously ask ourselves, what kind of support do we need to be successful in what God's called us to do, in the vision, in the goals, in the plans, in the roles and responsibilities that we've all been given? What kind of help and support do we need to really achieve those things? So, as you think about your team now again, take a minute here and think about, you can look through this list on the slide and anything else you can think of, but what are the most critical needs of your team at this time? What kind of support needs, what are the most critical support needs that your team has at this time? Whether it be prayer, resources, training, mentoring, coaching, pastoral care, debriefing, orientation, or anything else. What are the most critical needs of your team at this time? And hey, how do you think that might impact the effectiveness of your team? If you had more of that particular support, how might that impact the effectiveness of your team? So think about that. And again, you can share your thoughts and you can also share your rating. How would you rate your team on this? How comfortable you are with the level of support you have right now? So if you have any thoughts, there we go, Keegan. Okay, so you need more people. Common problem. One of the biggest problems or challenges of teams is having staff needs, right? You need more staff. You need more people to help. Yeah. Common support need that we need. We just need more people. My wife just said, hey, what do you do when you have some of these support systems in place, but people aren't utilizing them? So maybe you have some books, technology, equipment. Maybe you have some counseling available, pastoral care available, debriefing available. But what if people aren't taking advantage of it? Esther, people in training. So you need more people, need more training. Yeah. So in some cases, to my wife's question there, I think that's where sometimes you just, in a ministry or a school, you need to have some processes. Sometimes you need to have some policies and say, hey, in these situations, here's what we ask people to do. When you're having a difficult time, we want you to go get debriefing. We want you to go get member care, counseling, whatever. Sometimes we need to do that. Barb says to develop more, we need more people. Yep. So a 5 for Barb. People is a common one. Keegan just said he agrees with you, Andrea. Common challenge here in Chiang Mai. Yeah, so we need to encourage each other to use the support that's out there. We're blessed here in Chiang Mai. There actually is a lot of support people can get in terms of training, pastoral care, debriefing, all that sort of thing. But we need to remind people to use it. Remind people it exists. Let people know the value of it, the significance of it, and really encourage people to use it. For me, personally, I like to make some things kind of built into the culture of the way a team operates. Saying, hey, you know what? We have a culture that we like to be learning. We like to be getting better and improving on things that relate to our ministry. We like to be reading some new books. We expect to go to some training and development every year. We think debriefing is healthy and we want to do it once a year. If you make some of those kind of an expectation of the culture of your team, it's much more likely that people will do it and use those sorts of things. We believe in coaching. We believe in mentoring. I'm going to get coaching or mentoring myself, and therefore I'm going to be a good role model for my staff to do the same. So Morton says that he needs resources, money for programs and staff. And Esther says, amen to the culture of learning. Thanks, Esther. Yeah. So the money side, of course, I don't have a great answer for that one besides pray, pray, pray. But yeah. Thanks, Barb and Keegan, for the thumbs up to the culture of learning. Yeah, and Ivan says a lot of our team members have different needs. It's so true. And depending on where you are and what resources are available to you, sometimes it's hard to meet those needs. And it's one of those reasons why we end up needing to, and I can't say I'm great at this myself, but we need to just keep having open conversations with our staff, with our team, and just being real about how we're doing, what we need, and how we can help one another. And it's easy to get drug into the daily grind of running the ministry, running the school, and forget to spend time with our actual people, with our actual team, the people who are probably the most important, right? People of our ministry. Spending time with them just to find out how they're doing, what they need. What support do they need? And everybody is different. And understanding that everybody's different. Everybody's capacity is different. Everybody's needs are different. Everybody's life stories are different. And thus they have very unique needs. So being gracious with that, yeah, and having open dialogue about that is so helpful. Great. Okay, so a couple of you gave a number maybe, but most of you just gave input, which is great. So again, thinking about what support does your team need in these various areas, how big of a deal is that? Scale 1 to 10. Are we in desperate need of some more support? Whatever kind of support that is, not necessarily money, but whatever. Are we doing pretty good? Do we really need a lot of help? And hopefully you can all jot that down on your paper as to where you see yourselves right now as a team. So that's the support. I'm going to move on. We're down to the two last areas of the model. We talked about who we are, where we are now, where we're going, how we'll get there, what's expected of us. And then we just talked about what support do we need. So this next one, second to last thing is, well, how we have a team, how effective are we? Are we really accomplishing anything? Pretty important question to ask, right? We're not here just for the sake of being here. We're here for a purpose that God called us to. And how effective are we at accomplishing that? Now, it's difficult to measure effectiveness, right? It's kind of a vague, nebulous question. How effective are we? How do you measure that? Well, it's not necessarily an easy thing to measure, but everything is measurable in this world, and there are different perspectives. There are different things to measure. So on this slide here, I've got some examples of different things, different ways to measure, different things to consider as you're measuring how effective is your team. One thing to look at is just simply, hey, how well do we feel like we work together in unity as a team? Again, a subjective question, but it's a question you can actually quantify by asking your team. If you go around the room, you can do it openly, or you can do it, privately, where people don't have to share their answer with the group. Although I prefer to do it publicly. Say, hey, on a scale from 1 to 10, let's go around the room. How effectively do you feel like we're working together in unity as a team? You can just simply ask your team that, and it doesn't take long at all. It's a great conversation starter. How effective do you feel like we're working together as a team? And everybody's going to be focusing on different things. Some person's going to focus on how much prayer we're doing. Someone's going to think about how much we're helping one another, or encouraging one another, or getting tasks done, or making decisions. Everybody's going to be thinking about different things. And that's okay, because you're going to get their perspective. What's important to them right now? Because it's all important. Asking everybody, hey, how well are we working together in unity as a team? That's a measure. Another one is specifically looking at your ministry events that you run, whether it's a school you run, or an English camp you run, or whatever it is you do for your ministry. Obviously, at the end of an event, you can evaluate, get everybody together and say, okay, what was the purpose of this event? How well do we feel like we accomplished that, right? Did we achieve the outcomes that we were looking at in this ministry event? And that's similar to the third bullet, which is just in general, how well are we achieving our team goals? If we set specific goals for our ministry, which was one of the earlier key focus areas of effective teams, if we set our team goals and we made them measurable using the SMART goal approach, if we made our goals measurable, well, then we ought to be able to go back and measure how well we came, how close we came to achieving those goals. That's another measure of effectiveness. It's not the perfect measure of effectiveness, but it is a measure of effectiveness. How well did we do in achieving our team goals? The fourth bullet, how well do we feel like we're having our intended ministry impact? That's more of a vague, the maybe ultimate outcome goal of your ministry maybe is a little bit harder to measure, but hey, how do we feel like we're doing and having our intended ministry impact? Another one, you might want to measure the effectiveness of each individual person as well as the team, right? It's great to see how the team's doing. It's also great for individuals to get feedback, right? To know, how am I doing? So each individual can evaluate themselves. They can say, okay, how do I feel like I'm doing contributing to this team? What do I feel like I'm doing well? What can I do better? What am I confused about, frustrated about, whatever? And you can make that a conversation as well. As a leader, you can have a conversation with each individual one-on-one. Let them share about how they feel like they're doing, where they feel like they're doing well, where they feel like they could improve, what kind of help they need. And you can share your thoughts as well about those same things. Hey, yeah, I see you doing really well at that too. And I noticed something else you're really doing well at. And and by the way, yeah, I agree, you could probably improve in this area and maybe in this area, right? You can have those conversations. You can even have people evaluate one another on a team. And actually, that's a workshop that I love running. My wife and I run frequently, a 2-day team workshop where we spend the first entire day allowing the team to evaluate themselves as a team and get an understanding of where they're doing well, where they're not, what areas they want to improve on, and then come up with some goal of how to improve and make a plan. That's the first day of our workshop. The second day of our workshop, we spend with everyone getting feedback from one another. which sounds a bit scary, but it's actually a great, really helpful process where people can hear from one another about how they perceive one another in terms of contributing to the team. Now, we actually do this ahead of time before the workshop via a survey, and actually it's a confidential survey, so nobody actually knows what any one given person said on the survey, but what each person gets back is a summary of what all the people said and an average of what everybody said about their contributions to the team. And they get that feedback, and it's powerful. Sometimes it's a little painful, but everybody has areas where they're doing well and areas where they could do better. And the key is that we're here to help one another, to improve, to grow, to develop, and we're here to help one another. So by giving feedback, the goal is to help to build people up, to help them to improve. And so we give people their individual feedback on the second day of our workshop, and then we give them time to talk to each other one-on-one and just say, hey, here's something that I learned from this survey about myself and the way that people perceive me. I'd love to understand some more about what I do and how I come off that way. Can you help me to understand? And they have personal one-on-one conversations with each other about that. And it's amazing how healing that is and how positive that is for the relationships. And then after we do that, we spend some time with having every person pick something they want to get better at. And they go back to every team member again and they say, hey, could you give me some ideas on how I want to get better at this such and such? Could you give me some ideas of how I could improve in that area? And they help one another to develop a plan to become individually more effective and better contributors to the team. Very, very powerful, because it creates, again, this learning culture within your team where we're here to learn, we're here to grow, we're here to help one another, not to tear each other down, but to help each other to become more and more like Jesus, more and more effective in our team and in the purposes of this ministry. So, and whatever God called us to. So I love helping people to measure how effective they are as individual contributors. And then, of course, these last couple of bullets, according to our job descriptions, obviously, if you have a job description for somebody, it makes it much easier to go through with them on an annual basis and say, hey, how do you feel like you're doing in this area, in this area, in this area, right? Makes it so much easier to talk through with somebody how they're doing and how they feel like they're doing. And the very last bullet is kind of what I was just talking about earlier. If you have a job evaluation, but you can also use these surveys like my wife and I love to use, where people get feedback from one another. And just a really powerful way to get a sense of how effective are we and how effective am I. And, I like a lot of teams plan to have a yearly retreat with their team. And this is one of those things that you can work into the retreat. It doesn't have to be the entire retreat, but it's a great thing to build in as part of your time in your yearly retreat with your team, is to spend some time reflecting on the past year or the past period of time and say, hey, how did we do? What did we do well at? What could we improve at? What do we want to focus on in the future? And even individually, do the same thing. Great thing you can do at an annual event, and you can follow up with throughout the year. So, going back 1028, Barb asked a question a few minutes ago. Do you recommend using coaching type questions as you evaluate effectiveness? Great question, Barb. And what I would say to that is I love coaching questions. I love asking people open-ended questions that draw things out of them. Asking them, for example, like I said earlier, how do you feel like you're doing on the team? That's a very broad question. How do you feel about your role? How do you feel like about your relationships with the others on the team? How do you feel with your relationship with me? How could I be a better leader for you, right? How can I support you better? I love asking open-ended questions to people to help draw things out of them. However, I also like making things a two-way conversation. So if you're the leader of a team, yes, you want to be coaching them and helping to pull things out of them, help them to identify their goals and figure out how they're going to achieve them. However, another part of our role as leaders is to give feedback, is to express to people how they're doing, to encourage them, give them feedback on things, and to give them suggestions, and to challenge them sometimes. So we need, I think as leaders, we need to do both. We need to balance these things. We need to ask some great coaching questions, and then we also need to express our thoughts as well sometimes too. And if we have a trusting, good relationship with the people, they're going to accept that well. If we actually follow our own approach with other people, if we say, hey, I'd like to get your feedback about me. How am I doing as a leader? How can I improve? What feedback do you have for me? If you open yourself up to people speaking into your life, they're going to be much more open to you speaking into their life. But I think it's also a role of us as leaders. So yeah, for Barb's question, I do like coaching type questions as you evaluate effectiveness, but I do think it needs to be a two-way conversation where we also express our thoughts. Oh, sorry, I just noticed Keegan's question also. How do you ask those questions and get people's opinions without making it seem like we'll definitely try their ideas? Yeah, that's a great point. So if we ask people for their input about the team, how are we doing as a team? Where can we improve, right? They very well may give us a whole bunch of ideas. And our job as leaders is to write down what people say. So if they give you a list of 10 ideas of ways we could improve this team, write every one of them down. And our second job as a leader is to thank them for that feedback and say, thank you. I really appreciate that feedback. We want to hear that. We want to consider this. We want to pray into it. And tell them, after I've thought about this, after I've prayed about this, after I've discussed it with the team or the leadership team, we're going to decide what we think is best to do. And I'm going to let you know what we're going to do. But what that really tells people is, I want your feedback. I'm thankful for your feedback. I'm going to consider your feedback. I'm going to pray about your feedback. And then I'm going to do what I think is best after I've prayed about it and thought about it. I'm going to do what I think is best. And we can't do everything as leaders. And it's actually good to tell people that. We can't do everything people ask. But what we can commit to is asking for your feedback and considering your feedback and praying about your feedback and then doing what we believe is best. And that's actually a great thing to communicate to your team. And I think people will respect that. The thing that people don't respect is when you don't ask them at all for their opinion, or when you ask for their opinion, but you don't really listen to it or you really don't consider it, and they know you're not considering it. When you do that to people, it's just breaking down the relationship, and it'll cause lots of problems in the future. So great question there, Keegan and Barb. Thank you. So what you guys can do real quick here is think about your team again, and think about how effective you feel your team is. How effective do you feel like your team is on a scale from 1 to 10 right now? How would you answer that? Wow, my wife just said 9. Congratulations. That's really good. Thank you for that feedback, Barb. So this may be a difficult question for you to answer without spending some time with your team and discussing it. So if you're not sure, that's okay. One of the answers to all these questions is I'm not sure. I'm not sure how comfortable we are with this. I'm not sure if I can answer the question well. And anytime you have an I'm not sure question or answer, it means, okay, we might need to spend some time on this. Barb said maybe a 6. Thanks, Barb. Keegan says maybe a 7. Okay, so that's maybe Keegan, you meant personally for you versus as a team, but that's great. And Ivan, hard to evaluate without having a clear plan. Yep, okay, that's true. Without a clear plan and clear objectives, it is hard to evaluate. What are you evaluating, right? Yeah. And Ivan, I just noticed that you wrote a question earlier about how to get honest answers from people, especially cross-culturally, when you ask for feedback publicly. How do you get honest answers from people? I think that's a great question, and it is very, very difficult. So I think what oftentimes is helpful is to maybe not ask some difficult questions publicly like that. When, like, for example, when my wife and I do our team building workshop, we ask all those questions via a survey ahead of time, and it's confidential. Nobody knows who said what. And we found that people are actually quite honest in that because they trust and they know that nobody's going to know who said what. Yeah, they actually, my wife just said they can be brutal, brutally honest, which is good. And what I find is that when you bring back the results to everybody, they say, oh, okay, so I'm not alone in that. Other people feel the same way. When we spend time as a team asking for feedback, appreciating that feedback, and taking it seriously, thinking about it, praying about it, and doing something with some of the feedback, when we do that over enough period of time, long enough period of time, people from just about any culture are going to realize, hey, this is actually a good thing. It's real. It's not a way to get us in trouble. And it's healthy and it's good and it's helping us. And I think I'm going to be more likely to be honest more in the future. And it has kind of an effect over time that people start to open up more and more over time. But you're right, Ivan, at the beginning, it's very difficult to do that up front. Even a leader going one-on-one with a staff member and asking them for direct input or feedback is very difficult, right? So what you have to do is go with little tiny wins. If you go to a staff member and ask for some ideas or feedback, and even if they're only able to give you one little piece of feedback and it's really a tiny minor thing, just go overboard in thanking them for it, right? And taking action on it. And the more you do that over time, the more likely they're going to be willing to express bigger deals to you, bigger pieces of feedback to you over time. And that's been my experience anyway. Great. Okay, well, thank you guys for throwing out there some of your ratings. I'll move on to this last part of the model here. Now that we've talked about getting an idea of how effective are we, I could have gone on that topic a long time because I love taking time to evaluate how people are doing and helping them to set goals, helping teams to set goals, and following up on that. Because for me, just my last 2 cents worth on this area of how effective are we. To me, the main way that teams continue to grow and develop and improve over time is not so much that they took a measurement. It's not the taking of a measurement and evaluating and reflecting on how effective we are is necessary. And this comes back to my necessary and sufficient question earlier. But measuring how effective we are is totally necessary, and we absolutely must do it periodically. But that in and of itself does not improve your team by itself. It's not sufficient. In order to develop your team, we need to take action on the things that we learned. We need to follow up on the goals that we set and the actions that we committed to. And if we follow up, then the more we follow up and review, hey, we said we're going to do this. I said I was going to do this. How am I doing? What else can I do? The more you do that follow-up, the more effective you become and the more your team grows in its overall effectiveness. That is the biggest key, is that follow-up key to developing an effective team. So that's my last 2 cents worth on how effective are we. So going on to the last section here, the last key for developing effective teams, it's what recognition do we get? All right. And this one's probably the simplest of them all, easiest to understand, easiest to do. How well do we recognize people, recognize the team? How well do we reward people, celebrate the team and accomplishments? How well do we do that? How often do we do that for individuals and for the team? How good of a job do we do at providing positive feedback and encouragement to people along the way? And how well do we give appreciation? These are so huge to keeping the positive environment, positive momentum, keeping the energy of the team up. We absolutely have to celebrate and reward and appreciate and encourage one another. We absolutely have to do that. So this is a more simple one to evaluate yourselves on, although it's great, again, to ask your entire team, not just get your own opinion, but what does everybody feel? Because you'll find that different people need different amounts of recognition and encouragement and feedback and appreciation. And they might need it in different ways as well. Some of it comes back to maybe love languages, but people have a need to be recognized, to be encouraged, to get feedback, to be appreciated, right? Everybody has a need for that. Some people have more of a need than others. So you need to keep that in mind. How do they like to be appreciated? How do they like to be encouraged? How do they like to be recognized, right? Make sure you're doing it in such a way that individuals receive well, appreciate well. Make sure you're doing it for the team as well. And make sure you're being specific, that people know exactly what you're thanking them and appreciating them and encouraging them for. Because then it makes much more of an impact on people when your feedback is positive and specific. So again, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on this one, but I do want you to think about your current team and think about what kind of recognition and encouragement do we get and do we give on this team. And it's not just the leader doing it. It's again, a culture of it where we can encourage one another, we can appreciate one another, we can recognize one another and the team as a whole. Think about your team, scale from 1 to 10. How comfortable are you with the amount and level of recognition that you get on your team? So go ahead and think about that and share that with us, if you will, on the chat. Thank you, Esther. So you guys are doing pretty good. That's great. Keegan, all right. Barb, thank you. Keegan doesn't have a high need for that. That's good to know. Okay. And sometimes it's awkward telling people how great they are. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting comment there, Keegan. I think everybody comes from a different background and experience and culture in relation to giving recognition. Some people aren't good receiving it. Some people aren't good giving it. And so it's important that it comes off genuinely, right? That we really mean it, and that we're specific about it. And I think the more specific we can be about the feedback we give, the encouragement we give, the appreciation we give, if we can give a specific example of what somebody did and the impact that it had, that is the most meaningful feedback and appreciation for most people, when they really see exactly what they did and what impact it had on people or a situation. Not only is it received better and it's more meaningful, but it actually is a better it's a better way to encourage people to continue that behavior and repeat that behavior in the future, because they know exactly what they did that was good, right? And Keegan, I think in your case also, sometimes we have teams that have developed a culture that is maybe not very, not pointed towards giving positive encouragement and appreciation. Some cultures don't do that much. Some cultures would rather make a joke, right, and be hard on somebody jokingly, and that's just their culture to do that. And so it's difficult to work through those cultural differences. But at the end of the day, I think we need to think about what's healthier in God's kingdom. You know, making fun of somebody as a way to say I love you, or saying something nice. And yeah. So that's a tough one to work through, but I think if you continue working on it, you'll make progress. Martin, thank you for your rating as well. Yeah, Keegan, good about taking the positive approach to it. Yeah. Yeah, good comment, Ivan. Thank you. It is oftentimes easier to have these conversations with people who you have a common personality, a similar personality with. But at the end of the day, I think people appreciate the fact they know you, they know when you're being genuine. Even if you're different from them, they can tell if you're being genuine, and they're gonna appreciate that. That's good. Awesome. Thank you all for all those all that input and ideas. Let me try to bring some of this back around to a conclusion here. Going back to the wheel again, and these 8 areas, these what I'm calling 8 keys to develop effective teams. What I'd like you to do is just look at all 8 areas again, now that you've gotten a little bit more of an idea of what I meant by each of those 8 areas, and you've got your own personal assessment of how you feel like your team is doing in each of those areas. Again, what I would recommend is that you go back and talk to your entire team, or at least your leadership team, and get everybody's opinion on how they would answer these questions. Because you do want to have some sort of consensus on an answer for these. And when you don't have a consensus, it means that it's probably an issue, right? But at the moment, with what you know from your own perspective, I'd like you to look at your current ratings that you did in the last 2 hours and pick something. What would be your top thing that you think you might want to focus on right now that would be the most helpful to develop your team? Which of these 8 areas would you personally want to put your emphasis on right now? If you wouldn't mind sharing that with us all, that'd be great. And just type that into the chat. And if you want to elaborate, you can say, hey, I think I'd focus on this, and here's specifically what I'd want to work on, or what I'd want to do. Like what your next step might be.
There's so many to work on.
Okay, Esther, thank you. So 4 and 5. So how will we get there, and what's expected of us in the plan, and the specific roles and responsibilities? That's great. And I think that's actually fairly common in YWAM. YWAMers tend to have a great, strong vision. You know, they hear from God, they get a great idea of something that God wants them to do. Sometimes moving from vision into plans and action can be more challenging. Keegan. Okay, the last couple of them. How effective are we in recognition? That's great. And Morton, 1 and 5. So who are we, and what's expected of us? My wife said the same exact thing as Morton. Krista, overall, good. Brand new team, that's awesome. Yeah, so for Krista, focusing on the vision, that's great. And Ivan, shared and agreed upon plans, good. Ah, interesting, Ivan, yeah, good. And Barb on 1 and 5 also, okay. That's 3 different people that said that, wow. But you can see there's a huge correlation between 1 and 5, right? In order to know what's expected of us, we need to know who we are in order to clarify roles that make sense. And Barb also said number 8, so recognition, celebrating recognition feedback. That's awesome. Yeah. Excellent. So what I want to encourage you all to do, thanks for all that feedback. I'd like to encourage you all to take this back to your teams and decide what you want to do next. You know, what's the area you want to focus on? Exactly what kind of action do we need to take to improve in that area? Whether it's defining your vision, your plan, your roles, you're getting to know one another, reviewing your effectiveness, being better at celebrating and recognizing. What is it that you want to focus on, and what action are you going to take with your team to do that? Great conversation to have with your team or your leadership team. And I encourage you to come back to this kind of model frequently over time and just say, hey, you know, we talked about this 6 months ago or a year ago, whatever. What are we feeling like now? What's different? What's changed? What do we need to place an emphasis on? Awesome, let's do that. And the point is, you're going to keep getting better. You'll have ebbs and flows. You know, the team effectiveness will go up and down. But overall, if you keep asking yourself these questions and you keep working on things, you will, as a team, continue to improve and become more effective and a greater, more unified team. And I think that's the positive side of all this, right? Yep, we're looking at areas that are not ideal, but the point is we're gonna see continuous improvement if we do this, and that's the great thing about it. So I'm gonna take a minute here and just allow you guys to give me a little feedback. But first, let me summarize. So we talked about these 8 key elements of effective teams. You had a little bit of a chance to assess your team's strengths and weaknesses. Hopefully, you got a few ideas on some of the basics of how you might be able to specifically work on each one of those 8 areas. And then here at the end, hopefully an idea of how you might be able to develop the overall effectiveness of your team, what area you might want to focus on, what next step you might want to take. So those were the goals of today anyway. So a chance for you guys to give me some feedback about, and again, you can type this into the chat. Any one of these questions, you can answer all 3 of them or one of them, whatever is the quickest that comes to your mind. But if you want to share something you learned or something you liked or a suggestion that you have for me for this workshop for the future, I'd love to hear that. So feel free to share some things right now on the chat. And by the way, yes, this is point number 7 on the wheel diagram, is giving feedback. How effective was I? So yeah, just feel free to type some things in the chat box here for feedback. Any feedback is appreciated, and I'll even follow my own advice, and I'll promise to say thank you no matter what you say. Thank you, Ivan. Thank you very much, Ivan. I appreciate that. Anybody else willing to share? I wish I could tell when someone's typing, but I can't tell until after you've hit submit. There we go. Keegan, thank you. Thanks, Keegan. All right. And thank you again, Ivan. Thanks, Barb. Yes, it is a lot of information. Thanks, Morton. And thank you, Krista. A longer workshop, yes. Might just have to do one in person, Barb. These online things get a little bit difficult for people's attention spans, I think. Thank you. That's great. Thank you all for all that feedback. And yeah, I do realize it is a lot of information, and actually, you know, trying to dig into each one of those 8 areas is potentially a lot. So that's a good reminder that if there are specific things that you guys would like help on, please do contact me, contact the ALLC through our website or through Facebook, and we would love to try to help you more on an individual basis or in any way we can, or connect you with people that can help, or connect you with resources and tools. We do have a lot more specific, you know, resources and tools that we can connect you with. So please feel free to do that anytime. Thank you, Esther, about the wheel, feedback for the wheel. And Barb agrees, thank you. Awesome, thank you so much for that feedback. I'm gonna quick hand it back to Bevan here, and he can close us out. Bevan, can you take back control? There we go.
Well, thank you guys so much for taking some time to invest into your own journey as a leader and to draw out this good stuff that's in Jay. Jay, I thought you did a great job of taking time to keep asking us to evaluate each part and be open to questions. It was very interactive. So thank you so much. Did a great job on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that we have some really good steps that we can apply. Now just need the courage and the strength to put these things into action. Okay, so I'm going to pray that we actually do that. God, thank you so much for these amazing leaders that you have been investing into. I pray that you'd give each one of us the ability to take these things and take baby steps forward in each area, and to be able to identify which things we should be applying now, and to grow teams that are going to be effective and unified and bring you so much glory in the nations. Thank you so much for the privilege of chatting about these things. Please pour back into Jay everything he's poured out. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much.
Amen. Thank you all. Bless you all.